Consider This, with host Carol Schrader, is supported in part by Better Business Equipment and by Nebraskans for Public Television. Consider This, a news and information program recorded on the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha. From the Fireside Lounge in the Milo Bale Student Center, here is your host, Carol Schrader.
Hello and welcome once again to UNO and to the show Consider This. I always think, maybe it's all those years of covering news, that spring means proms. And one of the stories we always talked about was the fear, which is really a 12-month concern, year-round concern, about kids going out and making that big fling. It's so important, or going with the crowd. And underage drinking gets a little focus at that time. So I guess I'll just not buck the trend, but it is a good topic now and in the future. My guest today is Diane Reavy. She's Executive Director of Project Extra Mile. You've heard of Mothers Against Drunk Driving, which she was involved with, but this is an organization that targets underage drinking, not just drinking and driving. And Diane, welcome.
Welcome. Thank you very much.
We've met many years back when you were involved because of a personal experience. Let's sort of get that out of the way. I mean, people are driven from their, where they come from in life.
Well, I think it helps us to be more aware. Until our family was hit head-on, I wasn't as aware as I became very instantly. So I think it does make a difference, and I think it depends then what you do with that challenge. Do you use it for good? Or do you simply sit back and say, that was a bad experience in my life and life stinks? We really do have a choice.
To have a 10-year-old daughter, though, sort of physically decimated because of a teenage driver who had been drinking.
They didn't test him, actually, Carol, and that was part of the concern as a mom, and my daughter's in the emergency room still hours later with a broken leg, a pelvis, ribs, arms, the works. Unconscious, and simply asking the very innocent question, had you tested him for drinking? And the officer's response was, it was Saturday morning, and kind of like people don't drink on Saturday morning. And it was that very brief discussion that made me think, gosh, when someone's seriously injured, doesn't it make sense that we would test both drivers? So it was just that kind of common sense response to a tragedy in my life that said, I think I should be more involved.
We should say that your daughter is doing well.
Absolutely.
She's at UNL. I mean, this is 12 years ago.
Yeah. In fact, she grew up to play a fairly mean game of basketball and volleyball, so she's doing pretty well.
Well, that's one of life's blessings.
Yeah.
But the point is that, and I think I have a 16-year-old, and he doesn't drive yet, and I say this, I knock on any kind of wood around that he doesn't drink. He's not real social at this point. He's at that kind of awkward age, but. I know so many parents that have, oh, what's a drink, or they've been in denial, and I don't know if you'll ever get around that. You're trying to educate parents and young people.
I think there's a beginning, and particularly in the Omaha community, Carol, I think we see a difference in the attitude that's there. It is, unfortunately, for the most part, a rite of passage in the minds of many adults, which then, of course, is passed on to children.
I remember back when I lived to tell about it.
Absolutely. We lived in a different time, and we lived in a time when not all young people had their own vehicle. Today we pile kids in a vehicle all together, so when they crash, or in that instance, they're usually there without seatbelts on. They think the designated driver program is for them, which it is not, and they designate the driver who's been drinking the least amount. So there they have a situation where they've combined alcohol, they've combined the vehicle, and they're usually not belted, and the car's packed. So it's often a large group of them, and it's a devastation to a lot of folks.
I want to talk about the general concepts of education publicly, but there are a couple of, one bill that was just passed by the legislature and will be signed by the governor, according to Governor Johanns, and that is reducing from 0.1 to 0.08 of 1% of blood alcohol in the level.
Right.
Little federal pressure on that.
Right.
You were real involved in getting it passed as the recommendation on the federal level.
Yes.
Is that that's not just directed at kids. That
No.
DWI amendment to
Absolutely.
our laws is directed at everyone. But
That's a standard that those of us who supported it and looking at the research supported it is a standard that should be applied across the country, because it really should not be in Iowa it's 0.10 and in Nebraska it's 0.08. There should be a standard that the country says this is impairment for virtually every driver on the road, and it does not matter what size you are, whatever it takes to get you to a 0.08 level is impairment. We know that the critical driving skills, the thinking skills, the task division skills, those are all significantly reduced and impaired at a 0.08. So it was a really wonderful time for those of us who had worked so hard on it.
you're now working on, and this could change at any minute because this show airs
Right.
many times, and first round discussion in the legislature is going on right now about a bill to
It's called LB 114, and it's a bill that we refer to as use and lose. It does a couple of things. It provides for a loss of driving privileges for a minor who would possess or consume alcohol. So it's apart from the driving. It simply says if you use alcohol, you lose your driving privileges. And again, privilege is not a right. The second thing that it does is it adds the consumption language to the statute. Right now in Nebraska, it's not illegal for a minor to consume alcohol. It's simply illegal for them to possess it, to hold on to it. That's a technicality that should be shored up, should be closed, and probably should have been done a long time ago, but it has to happen, and LB 114 incorporates that. So it's a very important piece of legislation.
You are facing some opposition from a pretty potent force in the legislature.
Senator Chambers has some concerns, and sometimes his concerns have a basis of truth that you need to address, and that's important. But I guess my hope would be that he, as well as the other senators, understand that for the well-being and the health of kids across the state and families across the state, that it's an important proposal and really needs to be given serious consideration, and that politics, if you will, is removed as best as possible from that discussion.
What did he, how did he articulate his concerns? What are they? You were down in Lincoln.
Senator Chambers often sees, and he's right on many occasions, that as a state in our statutes, we have a real prejudice against young people. And granted, they are minors, they are young people, and it is our job, I think, to take care of them. But there are standards that we apply to young people that often as policymakers, there's not the same courage to apply that to adults, to, for instance, drunk driving statutes. So that has a basis in truth. Unfortunately, I think there's more to this particular discussion, and again, my hope is that it not be dragged out simply for the pleasure of the politics and the fun of it.
But you do have a lot of support.
A lot of support. It has a tremendous amount of support. The senators are very supportive of it. The public is just soundly supportive of the concept. So again, hopefully those individuals, and if they're still watching and it has not passed through the legislature at the time of airing, that they would call their senator and they would say, please support LB 114 because it's significant.
Now, one of the things that you mentioned that Senator Chambers brought up is that we tend to, it comes into discussions, into play in discussions like curfew. You know, we punish or we hang something over all the good kids just so we can get to a few.
But you know, it's the same thing we do with the speed limit. I mean, some of us speed, some of us don't, but we have a speed limit, and it applies to everyone who chooses to get into a motor vehicle and drive that car or that vehicle. So we do that.
But we don't target young people saying maybe they should drive at a lesser speed because they're not as mature and they're probably not as good of drivers.
Well, in that sense, no, we don't.
Maybe not the best analogy, but
Right.
you know what I'm saying.
But in that sense, we don't. But at the same time, we have to look at the facts. And unfortunately, we have young people who are under 21, who are the vast majority in terms of proportionately, let's look at it that way. They're about 7% of our drivers. They're responsible for double, at least, of the crashes. They're involved, for instance, in 1999, Nebraska young people aged 15 to 20 were responsible for more than 400 alcohol-involved injuries and fatalities on our roadways, just in Nebraska. So they're disproportionately involved. We know that alcohol is a single contributing factor, a major contributing factor to the top 3 causes of death for young people: automobile crashes, suicides, and homicides. So we look at the devastations that's leveled on young people, We can't ignore the reality that, in fact, as we saw research in the paper recently, their decision-making skills and their wisdom, for lack of, kind of putting it succinctly,
Experience.
I guess. Absolutely, that's right. It just isn't there, and we ought to at least be reasonable in our approach so that we provide that protection for them without being heavy-handed. I think that is important.
The driver's license thing. I mean, you talk about rite of passage, and I emphasize, I know driving is a privilege,
Right.
and I keep telling my son
Our own
that.
children that, yep.
But in this world where so many children are working and everything, I mean, every kid is working, it seems,
Sure.
or involved in volunteer things, that driving isn't the same kind of part of life as it was when I was growing up. Yeah, there was this cool group of kids that had their own cars,
Right.
but it was very limited. They didn't get brand new cars. I mean, that's
Right.
almost, I see so many
was
new
unheard of.
cars, just very unusual. Kids don't really see driving as we do. We parents nowadays, it's, oh, thank God they've got their license. I don't have to
Yeah.
shuttle them around. I mean, it's a convenience for a parent as much as it is. And so I wonder
is.
if you're getting some little bit of flack from the parents.
Actually, we haven't heard that, but I will say that kids support the loss of license. When we asked them in our needs assessment, it's been 4 years ago or so, we said, what would help you and your friends to stop drinking? What would motivate you to not drink?
Now, was that the goody two-shoe kids?
No, I don't think so. We actually surveyed about 425
Well, you know what I
of
mean. You
them.
get a bunch of these,
We-
kind of overachievers
No.
together, the leaders of their class, and they all know what to say.
Well, let me tell you what we did. We went into malls, we went into theaters, we went to South Omaha, went to North Omaha, West Omaha. We tried to get the city in its kind of totality, or the metropolitan area. So we really attempted to not do that. The same thing we did at our focus groups. But kids said if they knew that they would injure or kill themselves or others in a crash, that would motivate them. If they thought they'd be caught, certainly they all live by that motivation, and if they thought that they would lose their driving privileges. Yes, it's different than it was when we were growing up, but at the same time it's the same argument that happens with the drunk driving situation. And I can tell you that the research for drunk driving says that less than 3% of those adult drinking drivers who lose their job as a result of the loss of their driving privileges, it's less than 3%. So it's a very small percentage. The other reality is when they're still minors, in fact, those are our children, and we ought to be taking care of them. Is it an inconvenience? Yes, it would be an inconvenience, but it's actually fairly inconvenient and fairly painful to visit the mortuary or the cemetery eventually. So again, we have to look at and balance the kind of risk that's there and the kind of response we have as a community.
Has this problem grown at all, just in the sheer numbers of kids, because there are more kids driving?
Correct. So proportions, we're staying where we need to stay in terms of those are not increasing in terms of crashes proportionately, but unfortunately you have, as you said, the number of young people in the next 5 years or so is increasing greatly. So sheer numbers of kids who are going to be involved, injured or killed in some type of alcohol-related incident is going to grow. It continues to be the #1 drug of choice amongst kids, just clearly.
If they lose their license under this bill as it stands now, how long? Until they are no longer minors? Or?
No, for a first violation it's 90 days, and then obviously as a repeat, one of the things the bill does is it allows for a gradation of those penalties. Currently under the minor possession statute, a first offense is the same as a fifth offense, so it's important to have those be relative.
And then it would sort of be relative to, as a comparison, not a direct comparison, but the DWI penalties.
The same type of, exactly.
That there's a, once, okay,
Correct.
but you were still
Right.
going to. Currently, what if there's minor possession, there is any discretion with the judge to do anything other than what's on the books?
Well, the judge always has discretion under a probationary sentence, and that's often what happens is a probationary sentence. It would be an extremely rare case that you would see a court actually impose a license penalty. Again, that judge can use his or her judgment and that discretion, but that just does not happen. This bill allows for kind of a mandatory loss of license regardless of that probationary sentence. So there is discretion in terms of the range, but the actual loss of license or driving privileges is not a discretionary option.
Have the judges said that they're behind this?
We've not heard one way or the other, and I think that might be unusual for the judiciary to come out
Well, that's true.
on an issue like that. Yeah.
You are working to handle the whole situation of underage drinking, not just drinking and driving.
Right.
And we talked earlier about it, you know, it's a rite of passage, and that
Right.
parents, you know, I was looking in my cupboard this morning. I went to get the phone book, and we keep our alcohol there. And we don't have tons of it, but you know, maybe partial bottles from a couple of partial bottles from a party, and then something maybe that we drink. We have rum and Coke, so I have a little rum. And I was thinking, is that stupid, or do I just need to monitor it and check it and keep track? I mean, I don't even really. I know that any day my son could try something just because
Right.
it's there.
Right.
But I thought, now would I be foolish to not let him know that we drink responsibly, that we can have alcohol in the house, and that
no.
it can sit there for months and we don't
Right.
need it?
Well, I think a healthy attitude from parents is just imperative. Unfortunately, oftentimes that's not the case. I think using wisdom in your own situation, either lock it up if you feel that's a need, certainly monitor it, but more importantly, never ever have a sense of false immunity, which is what I call it, and that's when parents have that, it's not my child. Because all of us, regardless of the work that we do, some of us feel like, well, we do this work, we're immune. If you have a teenager, you're not immune. So there are just a critical importance to take steps to say, here's the line, here's where we draw it. If you cross that line, here are the consequences. And just to be very clear about that, and so that your young people, your child understands the parameters in which they live.
You know, every time there's a tragedy in this country, and we saw one this week in California.
Yes.
And as it took a little while for I got the initial information, and it was just devastating.
Yeah.
But alcohol was consumed in large quantities by this kind of group of kids.
Yeah.
In various, I'm not saying they were all a bunch of lushes, but as the story came out, there was drinking. And I can't help wondering, and I don't want to put more guilt trips on parents. I'm pretty good at putting them on myself, but parents can't lock their teenagers up. I mean, as a rule,
Right.
let them out when they can accompany them.
Right.
But there are so many parties I know that go on and have gone on in my neighborhood over the years where there was drinking and the parent was there.
And
And it just amazes me. I'm there, I can control it.
Well-
I don't know I don't even know what to say to that. To me, that's just not.
Right. It's an attempt on the part of parents to control something that's really very uncontrollable. It's important to remember that alcohol impacts and reacts with a young person's body differently. It impairs their brain differently. As I tell kids, they don't possess that shut-off mechanism in their brain. It's not mature as ours is, so that's why you hear about kids binge drinking, because their brain is not sedated like an adult brain. So they consume large quantities of alcohol before they have that sensation of being sedated. So it's important for parents to get educated, to know that they have policies within their community and their state that really impacts the way kids view alcohol and the way parents and other adults view alcohol, and then to make certain that those policies are enforced. And lastly, but certainly not least, is to make sure that their kids are informed. Educate your young people, but again, make certain they know where those boundaries are at.
Almost every time, unless a kid has fake ideas, somebody's buying the booze.
Correct. Sometimes the young person.
Right. I mean, if they have an
Right.
inn somewhere, if someone's foolish enough to jeopardize their liquor license, or some teenage employee there, or some slightly above teenage employee, a buddy, a friend, but still, somebody is usually buying it for the teenager, unless they have terrific ID.
Yeah.
How can we attack that problem? Because, I mean, as long as people are willing to do that.
Well, again, enforcement. I have a saying, and it's pretty solid with research. Enforcement equals prevention.
But if I buy something, who's going to know and who's going to prove? And they never want to narc.
No, you're absolutely right. There are two ways that kids get alcohol. One, by the social availability of alcohol, and two, by that retail availability. So if you're an older person, an older friend or a sibling, or a parent, God forbid, who's providing that alcohol, you're right, it's going to be really difficult unless someone speaks up, that's going to be caught. the one thing that we do, and we do here in the metropolitan area with the law enforcement agencies, is to coordinate collaborative enforcements of the youth alcohol laws, to do compliance checks, for instance. On St. Patrick's Day, the officers in this area will be going into plainclothes into businesses, identifying themselves to those business owners and saying, I'm here, we're going to be looking for minors, we're going to be looking for minors using fake IDs, so to balance the enforcement, but certainly to continue that enforcement. It's a current in the stream, as Marty Conboy often says, that if it's not
He's a city
constant,
prosecutor
yes,
here.
if it's not constant, the floodgates are going to be open, so it is constant.
What is the rate? You probably couldn't, no one could figure that out, but are they successful at prosecuting those that buy, when they can identify them? Buy liquor for minors?
That's actually really difficult, as you might guess, and probably the prosecutor's office could tell you that better. I know when we've seen adults who have procured or who have contributed to the delinquency of a minor, and those are handled very lightly by the courts in our area, actually in courts across the state. That's unfortunate, because in our view that really sends a message to the community about the seriousness and the opinion that the adults who are in control, be it the courts at that moment, have about the issue of underage drinking.
Okay, so you can approach things by legislation. Certainly the .08 hopefully will be another deterrent to have kids self-regulate. That
Well, hopefully
I'll get caught.
adults.
Well,
Yeah.
but I mean, we're
Yes.
just talking about the kids. That
Yeah.
even kids, not touch it, hopefully, but then say if they are, they really. You don't
We
even
don't
want to
even say
mention
that.
this. I know.
We don't
All right,
even
that's
say
why I'm
that.
not even going. Okay, but
Yeah.
they will continue to keep themselves from drinking. But then you can do this
compliance checks.
Compliance checks, and you can, assuming
Another-
you can get the bill passed,
Right.
that pulls the driver's license of these
Right.
kids if they're caught in possession
Or consumption.
Or consumption.
Right.
But other than that, what can you do to change some of these prevailing attitudes about rite of passage? My kid wouldn't abuse alcohol. Just because he runs with somebody that drinks, why should I,
Actually,
keep him away from?
that's usually an indicator, Carol. If your close buddies and the close peer group that young person hangs with is smoking or drinking, those are the behaviors and activities that young person is going to much more likely take up on and engage in those risky behaviors. Parents can, again, set clear boundaries, continually be talking to their young people. I think it is engaging in that discussion. Parents too often leave that to be something that isn't talked about. I guess the biggest point I would make is to never stop, to never give up, because it really behooves us as the adults to say, you know what, you're the young person, you're the child, we care about you, and as we have a campaign that's called this, we want you back, which is simply, we care about you so much, we want you to come home safe and sound. I think the attitudes we're working on today will be different 10 years from now, but they won't be if there aren't folks who are talking about it, making a difference, our children hearing it, and eventually their children hearing it. So it is the beginning, but it's an important one.
Diane, one of the things that Project Extra Mile does is try to, you can't knock on every door.
Right.
But you can reach into the home with mailings like this one. And this one really grabbed me, and it grabbed my son. Describe this picture.
That picture, Carol, is an actual investigative picture that was taken as part of a crash scene out in western Nebraska off the interstate. It was a young 17-year-old man. He was alive at the time that the officer, the first responder, got to him. Obviously, unfortunately, died. The dog was his dog, and the dog had a difficult time even leaving the scene, as we've said.
Sitting there as a sentinel.
Absolutely, and having a really difficult time just with that grief of an animal. And so, place that on an adult and a parent and a child and a sister and a brother, and it sometimes is incomprehensible. But so that's where that picture came from. All of the pieces that come in that, the elements, it's probably difficult to imagine that they would come in one frame. And I think
it looks like
was.
something an advertising executive
It does.
put together. The overturned
Yeah.
truck. In the foreground
Yes.
is a case of
Yes.
you've scratched out a brand name.
Correct.
And just put beer, but it was a real live
Yes.
case of beer.
Yes.
The body covered with the sheet, and the dog waiting
Yes.
for his master to wake
Yeah.
up or whatever.
Yep.
And I just showed that to my son. I said, this was a young driver who was drinking. I said, how does it make you feel? And so what I mean is you began a discussion at my house. Not a real long one, not a real heavy one, as I'm prone
But
to
a
do.
piece of that, yeah, very good.
Too heavy, Mom.
Yeah.
But is that the point of the things that come into the homes of high schoolers that
Yes,
you send out?
yes, and they're actually intended for the parents of those high school students, because what we want, as you've said, is to generate that beginning, that discussion. Parents are the most important piece in the whole picture of, are we going to prevent underage drinking? Because if parents would give a very clear no-use message, you know, if you're under 21, we don't want you drinking, period, and never ever get in a car with someone who has been drinking, never ride with a drinking driver. Those messages have to come from parents as well as the community. So
Zero
that's our
tolerance.
attempt.
Is that proven to work the best in families? Absolutely. Or how would you characterize?
Well, I think when we did our needs assessment, we talked to young people. I guess that comes back to me, in addition to any research that might be out there. We had kids who literally just over the table begged us to, in some way, have adults give them clear boundaries. I go back to, we have in this country, not just the state, but a 21 law. So do we mean business? Do we say the speed limit is 75, or do we say the speed limit is really 90? It's okay.
Plus or minus, depending on the day or the cop.
Absolutely. So we either have a 21 law or do we have an 18 law? And I think that's the decision. The research is pretty sound. The sooner a young person begins drinking, the more likely he or she is to have alcohol problems as an adult. In fact, if they start before age 15, they're 4 times more likely to have problems with alcohol as an adult person. So the research is pretty solid. I think it behooves and is incumbent upon us as parents and adults in the community to say, it is zero tolerance. We don't want to just reduce the harm that's impacted. It's like saying, Johnny, we think it's okay if you have a loaded gun, and we think it's okay if you wave it around and probably shoot it once in a while, but just please be really careful not to hit anybody. It's not manageable.
It's a chain reaction that can sometimes go awry.
It's a risky behavior that once that young person is engaged, you're asking them to make good decisions based on impairment, and it just isn't going to happen.
All right, we have about a minute. Quickly, if you wanted to say the name of that bill, it's LB
114.
And you're calling it, the nickname
is? It's referred to as the use and lose. You use alcohol, you lose your driving privileges.
And how can people get involved with Project Extra Mile?
They can call us at 963-9047 here in Omaha, or email us at extramile@alltel.net, and that's all spelled out.
Can they find it in the phone book?
They can find it in the phone book, although we have recently moved, Carol, so...
But it'll say Project Extra Mile,
yes.
so people tend to just
Absolutely.
Go to the phone book. And do you have materials or places for parents to start if they want to initiate a discussion?
Absolutely. We have a community coalition. They can be involved. We absolutely encourage them.
Well, I just hope that no parent ever has to go to the scene of that accident in the picture,
Right.
or even have their daughter in an accident as
That's
you
right.
did. It's life-changing. I want to thank you for being with us, Diane Reby. It's Project Extra Mile, and you may want to keep track of what's going on in this, and you may want to get some help on approaching your kids about the issue of drinking. Thanks, Diane, for being with us today.
Carol.
And thank you for being with us on Consider This.
Consider This, with host Carol Schrader, is supported in part by Better Business Equipment and by Nebraskans for Public Television.